The heart is everything that the Facebook picture is not. It speaks to the reality of who we are. Not who we're presenting ourselves to be, not who people think of us, not even how we see ourselves. The heart is the reality of our soul. It's who we are in terms of what we're hiding. It's who we are in terms of what we're presenting. It's all of our failures and character flaws and fractures and victories rolled up into this one word, the heart. You know, the Bible says God is like picking a new king, and he tells his prophet, the man looks at the appearance, right? We're looking around and the people next to us look put together and they're dressed nicely and this place looks great. But God looks at the heart. God looks at the reality of who we are. And then there's also distance between who we are and the people around us and what we portray ourselves to be. In the Old Testament, and then Jesus re-quotes it in the New Testament, he says, their lips, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And there's this divide between who I want you to see me as and who I am. But then Jeremiah, the prophet, says something even more profound. He says, the heart is deceitful. Who can know it? And he's saying that not only is there a divide between who I am and how I present myself to you, oftentimes there's a divide between who I actually am and what I know myself to be. So today we're going to journey with God into the heart of this one woman. But I hope that it wouldn't just be him having conversation with her, but him stopping and having conversation with all of us. Because God is interested in our hearts. He's not interested that we came to church on Sunday. He's not interested in our religious titles or facades. He wants to get to the core of who you are and dialogue there. And I think that everything about religion and church rails against that. But if you really know Jesus, you know that he's a safe person to talk to in the most authentic ways. If you have your Bibles, would you turn to John chapter 4 with me? So the Pharisees are jealous of Jesus in verse 1. He goes from Judea to Galilee in verse 3. And then interestingly in verse 4, he goes through Samaria. Now, no one goes through Samaria if you're a good Jew, especially if you're a good Jewish teacher. Everyone walks around Samaria to get from Judea to Galilee, because Samaria was kind of like, it was like Las Vegas maybe for the modern pastor, right? You're not supposed to show up there. I've gone a few times, but people judge me when I'm there. And people would have judged Jesus for going to Samaria, because it was this blend of the Jewish faith and the heathenistic faith, and they just really looked down on them. But Jesus walks into this place. He's sitting by Jacob's well in verse 6, and he's tired from the journey. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. So again, a little bit of that backdrop. But not only did Jews not talk to Samaritans, Jews never spoke to a woman in public. There was no reason for it unless you were soliciting a prostitute. I mean, that's the immediate association when a guy talks to a girl in public. And so Jesus is just stepping over all kinds of toes. But then we also know that this woman wasn't just any girl. She was like the city prostitute. She was the lewdest girl. And all the women would draw water in the beginning of the day or in the evening when it was cool. And there was also this place where they gathered to socialize. But this woman goes at noon because she's ostracized from her society and from being a part of that social circle. So Jesus walks into this woman's life, crossing social, economic, cultural, every barrier possible to sit next to her. And I think that's the first thing I want you to know about Jesus. That he's just different. That this God is different. Because in all the other religions, it's the prophets, the teachers, the wise men, the righteous, who's reaching out to God, and he just gives them whispers and glimpses of him. It's the best of us reaching out and then telling the rest. But in the Christian faith, our God, who is holy and righteous and powerful, he drops down and he reaches out to us on earth. And he doesn't spend most of his time with the teachers or religious leaders. He hangs out with the prostitutes. When everyone else is running away from the leopard, he goes and he touches him. When no one's going to go into the house of a tax collector or a trader, Jesus invites himself there and eats with them. When everyone else is walking around an empty tomb with a crazy naked guy breaking chains, Jesus walks into his life and casts out demons. And I wonder if we have found this Jesus. Is the Jesus we know sterile and absent and distant, and only the best of us can reach him after we've done all the right things? He might show up at church because he doesn't want to be unclean. Or is the Jesus we know, the Jesus you know, someone who will sit next to you in your worst moments, in your deepest brokenness, in your ugliest sin, and say, hey, I'm here too. I love you here too. He sits next to this woman. When the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? The Samaritan woman said to him, how are you a Jew? You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who is it that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, anyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever draws the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. He told her, go, call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true. So Jesus takes this analogy of water. He uses it as a metaphor. And he's speaking into her heart. And he's saying, man, there's things in your heart that you're trying to, there's thirst that comes out of your heart that you're trying to quench. And you really have 2 options. You can go to well water, or you can come to me, living water. And all of us have thirsts. All of us have idols and sins and accomplishments that we really hope to fill our hearts. We all have these things called fractures in our hearts. Some of it's from trauma. Some of it's from a lack of love or acceptance. Maybe for this girl, she wasn't valued as a child. And instead of holding her close to his face, her father would rather go and read the newspaper. Or maybe she felt rejected and people that were significant to her walked away at an early age. But we all have kind of these deep-seated fractures in our hearts that make us thirst to be filled. So for her, where did she go to? She went to well water. She had boyfriend-husband 1 through 5. And she was hoping that they could fill her. And especially in our culture, it makes sense, right? We've glorified romantic love to a point of salvation. That if you just find the right person, everything is made right. And that's what she goes to, and maybe boyfriend 1 hangs out for her for a while, but then walks away. Maybe the second one, she wants to fill her heart, but he comes up empty, so she leaves him. Maybe the fourth one cheats on her, but she's at her 5th boyfriend, and there's this sense that what she went to fill her won't. And I wonder in our lives, what have we chased after? What are our fractures? What are the places in our hearts that makes us grab and cling on to habitual sin or success or our titles or our family in a way where it's not really for them, but it's just to fill our own emptiness, our own voids? When I grew up, rejection was a big part of my life. When I was in elementary school, I got made fun of a lot. My mom came here as an immigrant, so of course I had a bowl cut. You know, that's just what immigrant Chinese kids, that's the style, right? And then I didn't know how to dress properly. My mom, God has changed her in deep ways, and she's the greatest miracle I've ever seen. But she was hardcore tiger mom, and she deserved to be. She has 2 masters. She graduated from the top high school in the country of Taiwan, and then she pursued a nursing degree a few years prior, and her average test score was a 97. I failed 5th grade. All right, just gotta put the 2 together. I mean, there's letters on my report card that she didn't know existed. She's like, there's other letters than A? Like, what is this like other letter doing here? And so, she didn't mean to, she loves me deeply, but there were moments where I felt rejected, and all our parents have their imperfections. And so I remember wanting to be accepted, and I would do everything possible, whether that was friends or girls. I ventured into pornography because it just satisfies so many vacuums, and sex is meant to in the context of marriage, but outside of it, there's this lure that tries to simulate the same thing. For me, I grew up, and there was this kind of sense that I wouldn't be provided for. Good? Is that correct? I don't spell wrong. And my dad, he worked hard. He worked really hard. But there were months where we weren't sure if the rent would come through. There were months where we weren't sure if we would have to move out of the home or if we would be able to pay off our credit card debt. And I was scared. And then there was poker, right? So my second well water was poker. And the first time I played poker at a casino, I won $600. That's pretty good. And I was like, I'm a poker god. Like, I found my calling, right? This is gonna satisfy me. But when we walk long enough, we know that well water just leaves us more thirsty. It creates more fractures. We always want more, and we always end up being satisfied, but then being more thirsty. And at church, I think oftentimes we just address this well water, and we say, hey, cut those things out of your life. Walk righteously. But then we know that there's well water that looks great. Our education, our titles, even our family. But when we go to them to satisfy our souls, it's not really about them anymore. And they always fail. I remember I watched this episode of Oprah, which I've only done one time because I'm a guy. And it was this wonderful episode where, very profound, where they had these women come up who were all morbidly obese. But they had gotten gastric bypass surgery, and basically they cut their stomachs so that they were physically unable to overeat. But why they were on the show was because each one of them took on another addictive habit. So as they slimmed down to normal weight, one of them went into drugs. Another started sleeping with any guy she saw. Another became an alcoholic. Another became addicted to gambling. And what I've learned in my own life and what I've observed is that cutting this out really doesn't help. It's about something deeper. And if you're just cutting out behavior from your life, you're just going to go to another behavior. So what's this living water Jesus is talking about? What's this living water that not only fills our hearts, but leaves us satisfied and then becomes a spring of life welling up, right? So that it's not only filling our hearts, but it's like overflowing into the hearts of others. So Jesus promises this living water that will satisfy all of these fractures and then go out and pour into our families and our communities in ways that aren't about using them for us, but we can give out of abundance. That's what this woman's asking about. You know, he confronts her about having 5 husbands. And then in verse 19, she says, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. You know a lot about me." And then she kind of like puts some distance between her heart and the truth that Jesus is revealing and herself. We're always tempted to put up barriers, right? Especially, we're so forward with the parts of our heart that are beautiful and that are lovely, but the parts of our hearts that are fractured, oftentimes we don't even want to look at it. And so that's what this woman is doing. She's changing the subject. "I see you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place of worship, that place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." All right, let's just step away from this whole my heart stuff, and let's just go back into religion. Let's just go back into doing church. How many righteous acts do I need to do in order for my heart to be healed? And I know that when I stumbled into sin, when I saw my own darkness, it was so easy not to engage with God on that level, but to just pull out my guitar and sing 15 worship songs, right? Or to promise I'll never do it again, or to do some other moral behavior to make up for the things that I've done wrong. But Jesus gives a profound answer here. He says, "Woman, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know, but we worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." He's telling this woman it's not about religion. It's not about showing up to church. It's not about doing these rites and these rituals. It's about having a spirit-to-spirit conversation with God, a personal, face-to-face conversation tied together in love and relationship. And he says it's about truth. It's about sitting with God and presenting yourself in the most truthful way and starting your dialogue there. And Jesus is always pressing into our hearts and saying, "Where are you, really?" When Peter was swearing that he would lay his life down over and over again, Jesus confronts him with his heart. But it's okay. Where is your heart today? Some of you, I just want us to stop and have a real conversation with God, because we're not used to that. We can be scared to do that, to say, "God, I don't even know if you're real anymore. I feel disappointed in what happened here. I'm bitter at you. I don't know if you really love me. I have questions. I hate you." Can we have the most hardcore truth, one-on-one, face-to-face conversations with God? Because that's where real worship starts. It doesn't start with us singing songs from where we're not. It starts from presenting to God where we are right now and asking him to meet us here. If you had just 2 lines to present your heart to God, what would they be? What are 2 sentences that you want to say to him right now? The woman said, "I know that the Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." when Jesus ends that sentence, he says, I am. And it's this throwback to Moses when he meets God for the first time and gets a name from God. And Jesus says, I am who I am. And he's like, that doesn't help me. Because when we asked gods and for names in that time, it was to understand their confine in our life. Give me a name so I can understand how to relate to you, so I can understand your boundaries, so I can understand, do I go to you when it's a time of war? Do I talk to you when I want to get pregnant? Do I let you know when I need to fall in love? Like which temple and which boundaries, and when do I approach you for what? And in the Egyptian culture, they had gods for all these different things. But God says to Moses, I am. I cover all of these categories. I am able to fulfill every piece of your heart. And when he says, I am, he's also saying, they are not. Those other idols, those other gods, those other sins, they are not. So when I feel rejected, I go to God and I hear him say, you're my son. Nothing can separate me. Nothing can separate you from my love. When I need provision and there's that gaping part of my heart, he says, I'm the provider. If you're lacking love in your life, he says that he loves you. If you feel alone, he says, I am with you and I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. If you're in a time of trial, he says, I will go to war with you. I'll be your strong tower. And if you need nurture, he says, come under my wings. If you're tired, he says, I will take that yoke and give you something lighter. What are the fractures of your heart? You're looking for significance. He's saying, I made you. I have plans for you. I knitted you together in your mother's womb. What are the fractures of your heart? And I hope that there's a sense that nothing can fill it. I hope you walked long enough in life and drank from enough well water that you know that it just leaves us more thirsty. And then there's living water. And then there's this God who wants to meet us in the truth of who we are in a person-to-person way. And he says, I can fill your heart. And there's so much freedom in that. Right? Because religion says we have to earn God's love. We have to earn salvation. We have to earn all of these things. And he says, I give it to you for free. And then in the most profound way, we get to be selfless to others. Because when we do good, when we love, when we pour into someone else's life, it's really not for us anymore because we're not earning anything at that point. He's already given it to us. And he allows us to truly love without thinking of ourselves, without karma, without hitting a bar. You just get to love, and it's not even from you. It's this living water that overflows into other people's lives. This woman, she puts down her water jar in verse 28, and she goes back into the town. And she says, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? And I love this little imagery of her letting go of her water jar, letting go of well water in her life. I feel like it's almost a reversal of the prophet Jeremiah, who says, they have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have held on to broken cisterns that can hold no water. And in this picture, in this moment, this woman lets go of her cistern, and she's filled with living water. This whole town comes back with her. It says many of the Samaritans believed in this woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. Now when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay. And he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves. We know that this man really is the Savior of the world. I hope this to be all of our stories individually. And I pray that this would be the story of our community. We all come to Jesus broken. We all come to him with great thirst that we've gone to other things to satisfy us. But Jesus said, I can satisfy you right here. And I'm praying that you would stop and just have a real conversation with God today. Maybe it's, God, I'm not willing to let go of this. Maybe it's, God, maybe I'll let you into this one fracture of my life just to see how it goes. Or maybe today is the first time you've ever heard of this Jesus. And you see the sin in your life and the brokenness, and you're saying, can this God, maybe this God, can heal me, can forgive me, can fill these thirsts in my heart and walk next to me. I'm not sure where you are, but I know we all need more living water. And I pray that as we have these authentic talks with God, that we could also have these authentic moments with each other. I know most of us don't know each other, but I hope that in a year, in 3 years, in 10 years, we could come to church and it would be the most real place. We could share our